Whether you want more innovation more easily, you are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed, or you simply know that something isn't quite the way you know it can be, you are not alone. I hear the same from leaders every day. On Uncommon Leadership, we explore aligning personal fulfillment with business success, creating authentic teams, and cultivating the resilience, adaptability, and ease necessary to move beyond simply surviving today's challenges into thriving. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams, and today we'll uncover fresh insights into what it means to lead in this world today. Joining me is Patrick Farran. Patrick is co-founder and CEO of Ad Lucem Group, where he advises executives and business owners through transformational leadership challenges. With 25 plus years spanning Fortune 100s to nonprofits to startups across multiple industries, he specializes in purpose-driven leadership, culture transformation, and executive transitions. Patrick holds a PhD in values-driven leadership from Benedictine University and co-authored The Intentional Executive. He previously led consulting at the SAS Institute and taught in the MBA, Executive MBA, and Executive Masters of Nonprofit Administration in Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. In full disclosure, Patrick is one of the coaches at the business coaching company I use. We discovered when we talked that, and neither of us compensated the other today for him joining me here today. Welcome, Patrick.
I appreciate that, the introduction, Michael. I'm looking forward to the conversation here today.
It's going to be a good one. When did you first recognize that integrating your whole self and bringing that into everything that you do might be a valuable approach?
I would say that it probably harkens back to when I was a child and got to watch my dad teach. My dad was an iconic teacher of 47 years, and I saw the impact he had within the classroom. I saw the way he brought himself to work. And so that made an impression upon me as a young child, and I went on to have some iconic teachers of my own as well throughout the years. And so in those formative years, to see the kind of culture they created in the classroom, the kinds of ways they supported students, the stories they shared, sometimes just the personal growth and vulnerability that they appropriately would share, were all impactful to me. And so I think it was inculcated throughout my educational upbringing in that context.
What was it about how your dad showed up in the classroom and with his students that led you to say, oh, wow, like showing up as who I am is really important. That's something I want to do.
Well, and let me offer one other just sort of insight, and then I'll answer the question directly as well. But one of the things that is interesting to me, because sometimes we'll hear the objection, well, what does it mean to bring your whole self to work, right? And so I want to just caveat my response that I'm not suggesting that there's a time and a place for segmenting off certain parts of yourself or presenting yourself in different contexts. So I think that the verbiage that you used around integrating your whole self in your work is really, really important, from being purpose-driven and being centered on your purpose. And so to your question, my dad, I don't know if he would necessarily articulate it explicitly this way, but he clearly saw it as his mission to improve the lives of others, right? And when he showed up, it was evident to me when I saw the way the students responded to him decades later. Just with still to this day, he'll bump into folks out on the streets. And I mean, he's had thousands upon thousands of students over his career. And to a person, they'll just talk about how he was one of their favorite teachers and how they impacted their lives in one way or another. And so to see that legacy that he's left, and I got to see the legacy in the making throughout his career. I got to see it at various stages. The way he would show up, the way he would support students, it was the care that he brought. And so I think that's the common thread, and I think that's as leaders, what we can do in other contexts is how do we show genuine care for folks? How, especially in this disrupted world that we're living in, how can we help folks be themselves at work? How can we support them in their various endeavors and help to create that culture that we want to cultivate organizationally? So I think there's some really powerful transferable lessons there.
When you were a little kid, how did you know that you were seeing all this intention and care?
I don't know that I necessarily knew that consciously at that level. I certainly registered it. I saw it. I'm like, there's something there. I'm like, this guy's my dad. You know, it's like he's like celebrity almost. It's like, you know, you see that and you're like, man, why did they? You know, he has a little bit of a different personality in the classroom. You put on the teacher personality. That's kind of what I say. We have different modes that we go into in our work context. So I don't know that I necessarily recognized, I don't know that I had the vocabulary or the paradigms to completely understand that, but it certainly registered. And in retrospect, when I look back upon that certainly was formative for me, as was my mom's work in multiple capacities. I didn't get a chance to observe my mom in the same capacity, though I did get to work on her dissertation. It was one of my first jobs, helping her decode that, in middle school. But to see both of them work, they both, not to be trite, but their life's mantra is to leave the world better than they found it, to help folks, to be in service to others. And so they've inculcated that model for me at a very young age. And so seeing the power of that model through many other folks who've demonstrated that beyond just the educational context, to look at leaders who have demonstrated that well in the way they lead, the organizations they serve, the teams they lead, and so forth. That's become my life's work, and my life's mission is to help create those conditions and coach folks and support organizations who are seeking to do that work as well.
So it sounds like there was a feeling that you received from your dad and experienced as he interacted with his students and his colleagues that you knew was special somehow. And as you learned more about life and working with other people, you started to understand what that was and how to start emulating and building it for yourself.
Well, and I think a one emblematic conversation I had with a gentleman in my undergraduate college years, I was sitting next to someone at church. We introduced ourselves, and as soon as I didn't even get the N off my last name, and he said, I went to Metamora, where my dad had taught some decades ago, 2 decades prior at that point. And I nodded knowing. I said, yep, that was my dad, before he even finished his sentence. And he said, that man had me so excited about chemistry that I almost went on to major in it. He said, then I came to my senses. And we joke about that. A lot of his students, even if chemistry wasn't their subject, he inculcated a love for curiosity, a love for personal growth and challenging themselves. He created a sense of psychological safety where students felt like they could learn, even if they didn't consider themselves to necessarily be the strongest students. He created that environment in the classroom that we're going to get some stuff done here. Right, and you're not going to be able to phone this in. He did so with a deep care for the personhood and the humanity of each of his students, and because of that, they would bend over backwards for him. I mean, he also coached some of the academic teams for some of the students that found that, and he won all sorts of national championships with his teams because he inspired them to learn and to dedicate themselves. And so I think the life lessons for me in terms of that leadership model is how can you provide a transformative model for the folks we serve. And so it was powerful on a number of levels, and something that certainly has stuck with me.
As you've gone through your journey, how have you found bits and pieces to get you closer to that? Was it a very intentional, now I learn how to do this piece and this piece, kind of picking things up accidentally? How did that go for you?
I think, like all things in life, that's not necessarily a linear path, right? I have found it was interesting in my early career. I actually started out in secondary education as well. I actually had the privilege of co-teaching with my dad. But I kind of joked that I don't know. I mean, I don't think I could ever be as good as that man. I need to do something different. I sort of said that implicitly and explicitly. But for me, I knew that I wanted to coach folks. I knew I wanted to teach folks. Again, I don't know that I knew it necessarily explicitly in the coach, because I do a lot of coaching. For me, that's one of my favorite modalities, is the one-on-one work that I do, because we can do some deep work. We can do some transformative work. And when I'm working with leaders who run organizations, who are senior leaders within larger companies they run and so forth, the ripple effects that I can see in terms of, if we talk about something, we have a key insight and they take that and they act upon it, and that betters their team, it betters their organization. For me, that's the legacy I want to leave. Knowing that I can play a small part in catalyzing some of those conversations, and those insights, and those coaching challenges and new paradigms and ways of doing things. I had an opportunity to coach and lead others throughout my professional career, and I always found that was what I most enjoyed. When I was able to be in a coaching or development capacity and see that impact ripple out, that became my sense of energy and sense of joy and purpose.
That ripple effect really is magical, isn't it? And the best part for me is you, the person I'm working with, don't even have to tell anyone else that you're doing this work. Just by you becoming a little more who you want to be, that ripples out and helps everyone around you become a little more that they want to be, which ripples out to everyone around them and helping them become a little more who they want to be, and pretty soon the whole world is a little more who they want to be, just because you've done a little work on yourself. Journeys often have challenges where you say, this is never going to work. I'm going to give up and go do something completely different. What has helped you through those times to remember that, yep, this really is where I am happiest, and that this is worth whatever trial I'm going through right now?
I don't know if you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It was one. I actually did my dissertation research on work meaningfulness because I had such an interest in this question, this very question, right? And Viktor Frankl and Friedrich Nietzsche, who came before him, one of the things that they studied, for those who aren't familiar with Viktor Frankl's work, he studied Holocaust survivors as part of his research, and he found that for those folks that had a clear sense of purpose, they were able to survive at a much higher rate, these horrible, unspeakable conditions. And the implications of that research, for those of us in much more benign circumstances and challenges throughout life, if we are centered on why we're doing something, we're much more able to endure that. Right. And this could be something large like that. It could be something more banal, like this morning at CrossFit. Right. It was a workout that on paper, it was like one of these, why am I doing this again? I know why I'm doing it for my fitness. Right. I'm doing it for personal challenge and growth. And I have to remind myself of that. But when the body is like, OK, this is enough box jumps, and OK, this is enough wall balls here. Right. You overcome that initial drive because I know that there's a higher reason or purpose that I'm doing that particular activity. So to the extent we can be mindful of why we're doing certain things, hence the crux of our book, if we're intentional about these things, we get much better results. We can be much more resilient when those inevitable challenges come our way. It helps us to inspire our teams as well, beyond ourselves, if we're centered on that purpose, and there can be some co-created purpose that we can help our teams to cultivate and foster. And it's a powerful driver for getting through those inevitable challenges. Going back to my dad's example, for instance, he in his college years, he actually lost his arm in a factory accident and almost lost his life for it. He was an international student, and he went through a very difficult time after that had happened. He had during that time, one of his tutors who was helping him stay academically connected, he was going to pursue a chemical engineering profession at that time. And one of his tutors who was tutoring him on chemistry was so impactful for him in that relationship. He was so moved by that experience, he decided during that whole experience that he was going to pursue teaching. And through that, I think he discovered an untapped element of his purpose, right? And that became a force driver for him throughout his career. And I think all of us, that power of centering on that is profound.
For those of us who are yearning to have that sense of purpose that your dad had, that you have, and don't have it yet, don't even have a clue what it might be or how to get started, what's a first step that we can take to understand a little bit of that?
Yeah, I would assert that we probably all have things that we find purposeful, whether or not we're always consciously aware of those. So one of the things that I'll often suggest with my coaching clients is tune into what our intuition is telling us, right? I'm working with a client who's going through some significant career discernment right now, for instance. And there have been some self-sabotaging behaviors that they've recognized in themselves. And in conversation, they realize, I've been pursuing pathway X here because I think this is something I feel like I ought to do, right? But all these behaviors are why I'm resisting. When we unpack that, they realize, what? If I'm being honest with myself, that's not really the path that I want to be taking. And that's common for many of us, right? As an example, we sometimes we have self-sabotaging behaviors often when we are misaligned, when we're feeling that friction. Our body talks to us, right? If we're feeling stress, or feeling anxiety, if we're feeling, acid reflux or, stress eating or whatever it is, right? Sometimes those are indicative of things being out of alignment. There may be other things, of course, going on there, but oftentimes at a root level, there's some kind of misalignment that is happening. So if we can really start at a visceral level to tune into those things that give us energy, bring us joy in the day. Sometimes you can do an energy audit during the day. The activities you did today, which ones fed your soul and which ones sapped you, right? Starting there, if you're really not sure, taking an audit on that can be a really helpful thought exercise. One of the other things that I will sometimes do with my coaching clients is a wonderful model that Dr. Mario Lipswiersma developed. It's called the Map of Meaningful Work. I had the pleasure of meeting her about 10 years ago, and she served on my dissertation committee. And in her model of meaningful work is a difficult construct because it's multidimensional. It's episodic, and she has a statistically validated model. It's very powerful with very practical implications. And she talks about the fact that we derive meaning from work when we experience a sense of unity with others, when we're able to find work that we are able to express our full potential in, when we are able to have integrity or authenticity with our true selves. If I have to come to work and put on a figurative mask to be someone that's not aligned with who I am, that's going to sap my sense of meaning. And what's the expressing full potential, unity with others, and serving others is the other core pathway, right? And those center on what drives us, or what's our inspiration. And so sometimes we're clear on there might be, maybe there's a spirituality that we hold in some form or fashion. Maybe there's something that drives us with our family or some other higher purpose or cause at that center. And there could be multiple sources of inspiration there, certainly. But if we're not clear on what that center is, sometimes these outer perimeters that she draws in her map with those 4 quadrants can give clues to that. And so taking folks through a reflective exercise, say, when have you experienced a sense of fulfillment at work? You feel like you're really intellectually challenged, you're expressing your full potential in this quadrant, or where have you felt like you've been able to have that sense of integrity, or where has it been, sapped again, so to speak? Those can offer really powerful clues to help you articulate what is that implicit sense of purpose there. So those are some suggestions that I'd offer.
I like these a lot. I do something similar with my clients in having them gather stories from people they trust on times when they experienced my client being super authentic to themselves, being very unauthentic. and other sides, both sides of other spectrums that they're struggling to understand. Explicitly asking for the experiences, not when was, because that helps the other people get out of their own shoulds, and it helps my clients understand what was the experience that the other person had that I was creating, so that I can start to see patterns in those experiences, because the experience themselves may have been very different. There's always then common themes underneath that can help us come back and understand.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great example of, I use appreciative inquiry in our practice, right? And whether or not you're labeling as such, that's a good appreciative practice. We talk about identifying appreciative inquiry for those who may not be familiar. It's basically a strengths-based methodology and practice. And so you look at when are individuals at their best, when are organizations at their best. So those kinds of questions where we're trying to unearth that can help us find some of those root causes of success, if you will, those areas that we can really mine for really positive nuggets.
Yes. And another exercise I always find helpful is having the person remember back to when they were young and what did they enjoy doing then. Because when we're young, we have way fewer shoulds heaped on us. And so the things that we enjoy doing are often way closer to who we are than what they might be now, with all the shoulds that we and other
before
people
we've
have
become jaded and
ourselves.
cynical, right? By all those learned behaviors. Absolutely. That's a great exercise.
So these are all ways that you are helping people feel safe and empowered to bring their unique talents to everything that they do. When you set out working with a new client to intentionally help them do this, what's the basic framework that you use, and how can our audience get started on this or further their journey if they're already partway through?
Sure. And I'll offer that, there's lots of different components of the frameworks that we may draw upon and different tool sets. I talk about many of them in the book and resource, and I'm happy to share some of those resources here as well. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday. They're a growing small business, and there's a leader that they're wanting to take on more responsibilities. So I met with a couple of the owners, and I met with this emerging leader of the organization. And so some of the practical things we did, we started with high point stories, right? When was that appreciative question? When was the organization at its best in this context, right? And so they each shared those stories, and from those we started mining what are some of the insights that we could draw from this. What does this tell us about the organization? What does this tell us about things that we might be laying dormant that we're not necessarily explicitly aware of? How can we draw our attention to it? And then, because once we have attention to that, we can think about how can we cultivate those kinds of conditions even more, right? So that's one of the fundamental exercises. And we had some really robust discussion around what that can look like and what does that mean and how can we do more of that. So that's one exercise that can be helpful. Another one, and this is a really simple tactical thing to do here as well, is I'm drawing on Adam Grant and others who use this out, and I've got these resources on our site as well. I had folks create user manuals. And a user manual in this context, just like, how do you work your computer or this or that, how do I like to be communicated to, right? What energizes me? What saps me? Making all those things that we often find out by trial and error and banging our head with one another, making explicit these preferences and articulating them. It's not too discongruous with like going to marital counseling and having conversations, premarital counseling, and talking about, these are some things that are important to me about finances, this or that and the other, right? The same thing holds in our work relationships, where there is benefit to articulating that. And so invariably there are some insights in this conversation yesterday where folks are like, I didn't realize that. or now that checks out. Now I understand that behavior, right? And why that's important to you, right? So it might be something like an example that I shared to illustrate, for instance, is I appreciate closed loops, right? I'm one of those folks that, if there's an email I send out, I appreciate, hey, I got it, or I'll take care of this, or this is done, and those things. I just appreciate the closed loop. Where some folks, hey, they have the mindset, I don't want to add another email to this person's inbox, right? So me making that, micro, preference known for folks who work with me, knowing that's important. They know that that's something they can emulate, and it creates an inclusive environment for our team, for example. So that's another really simple but powerful exercise that folks can do, is sharing their user manuals. Important caveats with that exercise that you want to make those voluntary sharing, right? You don't force sharing, make it accessible, folks. It's helpful for the leaders to go first and model that in that context. Give folks the optionality in terms of I've got a series of questions that folks can grab from our website, for example. They can feel free to share as much or as little of that as helpful, but it can be really powerful. I've done it at some organizations. Folks will create these elaborate PowerPoints and they really get into it and do like skits. Now here's my bullet points, right? So, but to each their own. And once they share that, it can be really helpful at folks navigating those. Talking about once you have some of those insights, that I also have some purpose exercises that we can take folks through, some mission and vision, whether they're at an organizational level, whether they're at a team level. If you are rowing in the same direction towards a common goal, and the team has co-created around the support of the process, or in some cases even the articulation of the goal itself, there's going to be much more robust support for that, right? So looking for those opportunities to co-create those goals and those articulations is another really helpful construct. I could go on for hours, I won't, but those are a few top of mind areas that I think are good starting points for a lot of organizations. And so again, it depends on where you're at and kind of what the circumstances are, but those are a few that may be particularly helpful or relevant.
What's the business value of doing all this squishy people, gooey, emotional, full stuff work?
It's a great question, because oftentimes there's this vision for some who may be less familiar or comfortable with it. They envision, holding hands and singing Kumbaya and so forth, and it's not that, right? It can morph into that if there's mutual comfort in going to more of that. But the reality is, when there is psychological safety at organizations, you have more robust solutions, you have better solutions, you have more innovation, more productivity, more engagement, more customer satisfaction. There's research behind all of this data, less turnover, less quitting in place. And so to the extent that you can cultivate these kinds of work environments that support this, all of those positive work indicators, all those positive productivity types of indicators that the hard-nosed CFOs might care more about, right? Those positively influence those as well. So it behooves us to take a look at these organizations beyond just, it should be enough for the ethical and moral reasons, right? But if that's not enough, there's a very clear business case for the ROI on leading well and leading holistically. In addition, to make it a no-brainer, these are important things to pay attention to.
For those of us who aren't super comfortable talking about all these things, how can we start talking about these things with our colleagues and our management chain?
So I say start small, right? Start small. So thinking about, for example, we have a lot of meetings in work contexts, right? And so starting with the way we run our meetings is a really good starting point. So thinking about, if you're a formal or informal leader on a team, for example, thinking about the behaviors that we want to emulate and working to model those intentionally. Thinking about the opportunities to articulate some group norms. And if they haven't been articulated before, talk about, hey, how do we want to run this meeting? What does a good meeting look like here, right? It doesn't have to be the pie in the sky kind. Let's be very pragmatic and tactical to start with, and say, what's working well with these meetings? How can we do more of that? What do you find most helpful? What would you like to see, right? When we can invite dissent and constructive feedback. I mean, a complaint is a wish not fulfilled, right? And so if we can focus on what's going well and elevate the thinking, but also like, hey, what else could we do to do these better, and do it in the context of what I like to call an abundance mindset, where it's not just a bitch session, if you will, but really say, hey, how can we take a look at these things that are going well? What are the other additional opportunities we have to improve these? Those are very small, but I mean, the amount of time we spend in meetings, for example, if you can improve your meetings and start there, you're making good progress, right? So that would be one really tactical thing to do. I think some other things that are really important is being in touch, particularly as a leader, but all of us, we all lead, right? Whether we're anointed with a particular formal authority title, we all have opportunities to lead in terms of how we model and support one another and so forth. But being in touch with our EQ, our emotional intelligence, if you will, recognizing that we all have emotions. Right. And this is where some of the squishy stuff, coming back to the point about your original question about bringing our whole self to work, we're going to come to work with our emotions, right? We don't have control over the fact where we're going to have emotions. We're all going to have our emotions, right? What we can control and influence is how do we respond to those emotions, right? How do we model good responses if there's something that's particularly triggering or angering or frustrating or whatever it might be? How can we model good pauses in the moment, good responses, healthy responses, helping folks give space to process, without it becoming a therapy session, right? We can still acknowledge the humanity in others, right? And give time and space and apologize when we need to. So really getting in touch with the EQ components, and that's easier said than done, but that's a skill like anything else that can be learned by teams and by leaders. The other thing I would offer is creating intentionally a culture of psychological safety. And so inviting dissent, inviting contrary opinions. And when you get them, actually embracing them. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to agree with them or you necessarily need to adopt that. But hey, Michael, I really appreciated that challenge you offered me there. That was really helpful. It caused me to think about X, Y, and Z that I hadn't considered before. And modeling that as a leader can go a long way towards creating that psychological safety to help as well. So those are a few sort of cursory thoughts that I'll offer there.
Thank you. The modeling is so important. One way I found really helpful to start that sharing and build some of that psychological safety is to run the perfection game on the way your team works. Go through all your activities that you do on a day-to-day basis and larger timescales. And for each thing, each person, just how perfect is that for you? And the rules here are, if you don't have anything concrete ideas to make it better, then it's 10 because you don't know how to make it better. So it must be perfect. If you have an idea to make it twice as good, then then it's a 5. And if you have an idea to make it 10 times as good, then you're a 1. And then you can interpolate other values in between.
Uh-huh.
This gives people a really easy way in hardly any time at all. Just go around the room. The way we run meetings, Patrick, Michael, Jose, Andrea, Mario, 10, 10, 9, 10, 5, 1, 0, negative 18. And so you can quickly, just in real time, go through everybody, through all the things, and get a really clear picture. If there are things for everyone is like 1, that's something to go after. And if it's something that most people are a 10 and 1 or 2 people are an 8 or a 5, then those have some room for improvement and not as important to do right away. And things that maybe everyone complains about all the time, but everyone says is a 10, maybe it's not as horrible as we think it is. Or maybe that's a really interesting thing to go inquire into more, because if we all think it's horrible and yet we don't have any ideas on how to make it better, then something doesn't match up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what I love about tools like that, right? You you can test these out within your organization and on your teams, right? And because some of these are contextual, and some things may work better or others in different contexts, but having an attitude, hey, I think, let's give this process or this framework or this tool a try for this meeting or this quarter or this month or whatever it might be, and naming that and experimenting with some of those new meeting structures or practices, and seeing what's helpful, and having an attitude of experimentation can be really powerful.
And it can be a really good way to get into talking about preferences. So if I'm really unhappy with meetings because they are super unstructured, we never have agendas or know what the point is, and all the other things that we all know now that is what we need to do to have good meetings, then first of all, I have concrete ideas, so it's probably a 5 or a 2 or a 1 for me, so I can speak that up. And then I can very simply say, what would really help me is to have more structure. For example, let's send out agendas at least an hour ahead of time. The day before would be even better. Let's have a clear point on what each meeting is for. And if we have 3 different points, then let's have 3 different meetings, even if they're within the same half-hour structure, and go through those kinds of things. And it can be a lot less scary approaching our preferences that way than if we have a meeting and say, so Patrick, when do you prefer to be structured versus spontaneous? What if you were started working with someone or joining a team and you finding that really the key problem here is that they're experiencing so much change, uncertainty, and overwhelm that they don't know how to handle that, let alone anything else? Where would you start with them in helping them turn all of that chaos into some structure and certainty?
So, and this comes back, and I could talk on this for hours. So I think the short response is I try to start with an appreciative lens, an appreciative inquiry lens, where we start about what is working well here in this context. And if it's not in this context, drawing from another similar context. When have you had experiences where you have been successful at X, and what can we draw from that? Because sometimes if we jump straight, and there's a time and a place for appreciative inquiry, right? If my plane's going down, right, I want the pilot to just take charge and get it done, right? That's not the time, right? So it is contextual, right? But if it's something where there's the room and space and safety to have these conversations, that's a best practice approach to start there versus, sorry, Michael, we got this problem of yours we got to fix. Because the research shows when we start with a problem to be solved, and we start with the traditional sort of deficit mindset, as David Cooper Ryder, who is one of the fathers, if you will, of appreciative inquiry, said, the canvas of colors that are available to us is much smaller, right? The possibilities are much smaller to address that. Whereas if we start from a more of a position of abundance and strength and saying, hey, what are the possibilities? What are the possibilities here? What's our vision here? Versus not just the absence of this problem, but what is our actual vision that we're wanting to achieve? We can elevate our thinking and come up with some better solutions there. And so I think that's the other dimension to make explicit is we want to think about what is our vision? What's our vision for success? What does success look like in these various contexts here? And giving word and voice to that, if it's in a team context, co-creating that vision together to the extent that you can do that, can become a force multiplier for driving towards that, giving clarity of, oh, well, if that's where we're wanting to go, how does our current state align with that? Well, actually, this is, but if we're focused on that positive vision versus just this current state and we're, navel gazing down here at this problem, we're able to think at a different level. And so that's a really powerful sort of framework that I can offer in short form, if you will.
Thank you. I use something similar a lot, and I find it very helpful almost every time as well. The slight change that I use is asking, if this were to be fixed or were to disappear, become not a problem, what becomes possible for you? And one thing that always amazes me about this is that if we just sit down and say, so what are our options? It seems to be all very logical, very focused on business outcomes. The person gets lost or even shut down and submerged very explicitly. And this simple shift in phrasing to what would become possible for you somehow opens up all of the internal dreams and wishes and joy and all of the not logical, but probably going to solve the problem much more elegantly and simply and quickly. Solutions that would never come about if we're just brainstorming options.
Yep. That's great. And that is a very appreciative inquiry type of methodology. It's very consistent with that.
For people, Patrick, who are enjoying our conversation today and would like to continue after we get off, or who would love to explore working with you, what's the best way for them to find and connect?
So 2 places that are good to connect. I'm certainly willing to connect on LinkedIn, Patrick Farran, Patrick Farran. Message me, where you learned of me, right? If it's a random connection request, I'm less inclined to accept it. So message that we heard here. Our website is adlucemgroup.com. Ad Lucem is Latin for to the light, and that's spelled ADLUCEMGROUP. We've got a number of resources that are available to folks. I offer free strategy sessions for authority problem you might be going through as well. So if there's something that would be helpful to discern fit and talk through something that might be helpful to you without a sales pitch, that's another resource that's available on our site. So those would be the 2 best places to stop.
And your book is out sometime soon?
We're coming out in January. I'm in the pre-launch phase. I'm recruiting my launch team right now as we speak. So depending on when this goes live here, we're looking at a January official launch for that. So it should be out soon. I've got a book page on my website as well with that resource. So if folks are interested in that, they can sign up there and we'll get that notification out when it's available. I've made it. My co-author and I, Melissa Norcross, we've created a very significant appendix of resources to draw upon with teams. A lot of things that we've used in various contexts with our teams that we consult and coach with. I wanted to make it really accessible for folks and get that out there so they can see the benefits of those.
That's great. And we'll have all those links in our show notes.
Wonderful.
What would you like to leave our audience with today?
I would encourage you to look for that kernel of what is your purpose. What do you consider your life's purpose? Another exercise that, to your earlier question, if you're struggling to figure that out, a really powerful one that I found for myself at one point was writing your obituary and thinking, what do you want? What kind of legacy do you want to see for yourself in this world? And that can be a really clarifying thought exercise to go through. What's truly important, and then reverse engineering from that. So I would say if you can center on your purpose and think about what kind of legacy it is that you want to leave, and ask yourself, how is my life aligning with that legacy and sense of purpose? You'll have a much more fulfilling journey along the way if you're staying tuned into that versus just mindlessly kind of going through the motions. So.
That is something I never thought of doing. I love it. I will go do that this evening.
Sounds a little morbid, but it's actually pretty powerful, right? If you go with the right attitude and spirit, it can be really, really significant.
It's a delightful way to focus in on the significant aspects of a life. Thank you, Patrick, for a wonderful conversation today.
It was my pleasure. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Michael. Thank you.
And thank you, audience, for joining us today. Patrick and I would love to know what is in your obituary. Thanks, and have a great day.